What happens when one of Hollywood's most passionate actors sits down with a talk show host who seems determined to humiliate him on live television? You're about to witness one of the most uncomfortable interviews in late-night history, where professionalism went out the window and a legendary actor reached his breaking point. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment below about which side you're on after hearing this story. The Late Show with Stephen Colbert was supposed to be a routine promotional stop for Nicolas Cage, who was making the rounds to discuss his latest film project. What started as a standard celebrity interview quickly devolved into something far more sinister. Colbert, known for his sharp wit and political commentary, seemed to have a different agenda that night, one that would ultimately backfire spectacularly. As Cage walked onto the set, the audience erupted in their usual applause. He waved, flashed that characteristic smile, and took his seat across from Colbert. The host shuffled his blue cards, that familiar smirk already playing across his face. But there was something different in his eyes tonight, something that suggested this wasn't going to be the typical, light-hearted banter viewers had come to expect. "Nicolas Cage, everybody," Colbert announced to the crowd, his voice carrying that practiced television enthusiasm. "Now, Nicolas, I have to ask, and I think America wants to know, do you ever watch your own movies and think, wow, I really went overboard there?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Cage's smile faltered slightly, but he maintained his composure. "Stephen, I think every actor has moments where they look back and see things they might have done differently. But I stand by my choices. I believe in committing fully to every role." Colbert leaned forward, his elbows resting on his desk. "But surely you must realize that some of your performances have become, well, let's call them internet memes. The way you delivered certain lines, the facial expressions, it's all become quite the joke online." "I'm aware of the internet's fascination with my work," Cage replied, his voice taking on a slightly sharper edge. "But I've never been interested in playing it safe. I'd rather swing for the fences and occasionally strike out than never swing at all." Right, Colbert nodded, but his tone suggested he wasn't really listening. "But don't you think there's a difference between taking risks and just, well, overacting? I mean, some critics have suggested that you've turned acting into a kind of performance art, and not necessarily the good kind." The audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the playful ribbing they were used to seeing on late-night television. There was an edge to Colbert's questioning that felt personal, almost cruel. Cage straightened in his chair, his hands gripping the armrests. "Stephen, I've been acting for over 4 decades. I've worked with some of the most respected directors in the business. I don't think it's fair to reduce my entire career to a few cherry-picked moments that people like to laugh at online." "Oh, I'm not reducing your entire career," Colbert said with a wave of his hand. "I'm just saying that maybe, just maybe, you've become a bit of a caricature of yourself. Like when people think Nicolas Cage, they don't think Oscar winner anymore. They think crazy eyes and screaming about bees." The reference to the Wicker Man was obvious, and the audience let out a few nervous chuckles, but Cage wasn't laughing. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, you could see the actor struggling to maintain his professional demeanor. "You know what, Stephen? I think you're missing the point entirely. Those moments you're talking about, they come from a place of genuine emotion and commitment. I don't apologize for giving everything I have to a role, even if it makes some people uncomfortable." Colbert's smirk widened. "Uncomfortable? Is that what we're calling it now? Because I think most people would call it hilarious. In fact, didn't you once say in an interview that you wanted to reinvent acting? How's that working out for you?" The host's words were like daggers, each one carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage. Cage's breathing became more visible, his chest rising and falling as he fought to control his temper. The audience was dead silent now, sensing that something was going very wrong. "I said I wanted to expand the possibilities of what acting could be," Cage said slowly, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I wanted to push boundaries, to find new ways to express human emotion. If that makes me a target for people who prefer their entertainment bland and predictable, then so be it." "But Nicolas," Colbert pressed on, seemingly oblivious to the warning signs, "don't you think audiences deserve better than watching you have what appears to be a mental breakdown on screen? I mean, your performance in Vampire's Kiss, the way you ate that cockroach, the accent you used, it was all so bizarre that people still can't figure out if you were serious or just messing with everyone." That was the line, the moment where Colbert crossed from professional ribbing into personal attack. Cage's face went through a series of expressions, like watching a thunderstorm build in real time. His eyes narrowed, his lips pressed into a thin line, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 4 decades of professional experience and personal pride. You know what, Stephen? I think I know what's happening here. You're trying to get a reaction out of me. You want me to lose my temper on your show so you can have your little viral moment. Well, congratulations, you're getting close. The tension in the studio was palpable. Camera operators zoomed in closer, sensing that television history was about to be made. Colbert, however, seemed to mistake Cage's warning for weakness and pressed forward with his attack. Oh, come on, Nicolas, can't you take a little criticism? I thought actors were supposed to have thick skin. Or maybe that's just the good actors. The insult hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Cage stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent studio. When he spoke, his voice was controlled, but there was fire behind his eyes. Thick skin? You want to talk about thick skin? Let me tell you something about thick skin, Stephen. Thick skin? You want to talk about thick skin? Let me tell you something about thick skin, Stephen. I've been in this business since I was a teenager. I've had critics tear apart my work. I've had directors scream at me. I've had studios try to destroy my career. But you know what I've never had? I've never had someone invite me onto their show just to humiliate me for cheap laughs. Colbert's expression shifted slightly, but he wasn't backing down. If anything, he seemed energized by Cage's response. Nicolas, sit down. You're being a little dramatic, don't you think? This is just a conversation. A conversation? Cage remained standing, his voice rising with each word. A conversation involves two people talking to each other with mutual respect. What you're doing is putting me on trial for the crime of being passionate about my craft. The audience was completely silent now. You could hear the hum of the studio lights, the quiet whir of the cameras. Even the production crew seemed frozen in place, unsure of how to handle what was unfolding before them. Colbert leaned back in his chair, that infuriating smirk still plastered across his face. Look, Nicolas, I'm sorry if you're feeling attacked, but these are legitimate questions about your career choices. Your fans deserve to know why you've made some of the decisions you've made. My fans? Cage's voice cracked with emotion. My fans don't need you to speak for them, Stephen. My fans understand that I've spent my entire career trying to give them something genuine, something real. I don't phone it in. I don't play it safe. I give everything I have to every single role, even if it means some people are going to mock me for it. But that's exactly my point, Colbert continued, his voice taking on a condescending tone. Maybe it's time to consider playing it a little safer. Maybe it's time to admit that some of your choices haven't worked out the way you hoped they would. Cage's hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from pure rage. You want me to admit that I've made mistakes? Fine, I've made mistakes. Every actor has. But I've also created characters that people remember decades later. I've pushed the boundaries of what's possible in cinema. I've taken risks that most actors wouldn't dream of taking. And how's that working out for your career? Colbert asked with mock concern. I mean, when was the last time you were in a truly successful film? When was the last time you got a role that wasn't just capitalizing on your reputation as the crazy guy? The question was like a slap in the face. Cage's entire body tensed, and for a moment, it looked like he might actually walk off the set. But instead, he did something unexpected. He started to laugh, not a happy laugh, but a bitter, angry sound that sent chills through the studio. You know what, Stephen? I think I understand what's happening here. You're not interested in having a real conversation about acting or creativity or art. You're interested in getting your little soundbite, your little moment that's going to end up on social media with a caption about how Nicolas Cage lost his mind on television. That's not true, Colbert protested, but his voice lacked conviction. I'm genuinely curious about your artistic process. My artistic process? Cage's voice was getting louder now, more intense. My artistic process is about finding truth in every moment. It's about being vulnerable and honest and real, even when it's uncomfortable. It's about taking the script and the character and finding something deeper, something that connects with people on a human level. But Nicolas, Colbert interrupted, don't you think that sometimes your version of truth comes across as, well, unhinged? Like when you're screaming about alphabets or declaring yourself a vampire? Is that really connecting with people, or is it just confusing them? The reference to some of Cage's more intense performances was clearly calculated to get a reaction, and it worked. Cage's face went through a series of expressions, from hurt to anger to something that looked almost like pity. You know what the real tragedy is here, Stephen? You're supposed to be an intelligent man. You're supposed to understand comedy and performance and what it means to entertain people. But you're so focused on getting your cheap laughs that you're completely missing the point. And what point is that? Colbert asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The point is that everything I do comes from a place of love. Love for the craft, love for the story, love for the audience. When I commit fully to a role, when I give everything I have to a character, it's because I believe that's what the audience deserves. They deserve an actor who's not afraid to look foolish, who's not afraid to go to dark places, who's not afraid to be completely honest. Colbert rolled his eyes. Come on, Nicolas. Are you really trying to tell me that when you're running around screaming about bees, you're doing it out of love for your audience? Yes, Cage exploded, his voice echoing through the studio. Yes, I am, because that character, in that moment, is experiencing genuine terror and confusion and rage. And if I don't commit to that completely, if I hold back because I'm worried about looking silly, then I'm cheating the audience. I'm giving them something false. But it's just a movie, Nicolas, Colbert said dismissively. It's not real life. You don't have to actually lose your mind to play a character who's losing his mind. Cage stared at him for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet but filled with disappointment. That's exactly the kind of thinking that's killing cinema, Stephen. That idea that we should just phone it in, that we should just hit our marks and say our lines and collect our paychecks. That's not what acting is about. Then what is it about? Colbert challenged. It's about transformation. It's about becoming someone else completely. About finding parts of yourself you didn't know existed. It's about taking risks and being vulnerable and putting yourself out there, even when you know people are going to judge you for it. The studio was dead silent. Even the cameras seemed to have stopped moving. Colbert shifted in his chair, and for the first time since the interview began, he looked slightly uncomfortable. Look, Nicolas, I think you're taking this whole thing a little too seriously. We're just having a conversation about your career. There's no need to get so worked up about it. Worked up? Cage's voice was rising again. You spend 20 minutes attacking everything I've worked for, everything I believe in, and you think I'm getting worked up? Stephen, this is my life's work you're talking about. This is 4 decades of blood, sweat, and tears. And 4 decades of questionable choices, Colbert added with a smirk. That was it. The final straw. Cage's face went completely still, and when he spoke, his voice was so quiet that the studio microphones had to strain to pick it up. You know what, Stephen? I think we're done here. You know what, Stephen? I think we're done here. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Cage's voice was so quiet, so controlled, that it was somehow more terrifying than if he had been screaming. The entire studio seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Colbert, however, seemed oblivious to the gravity of the moment. He chuckled and shuffled his cards again. Come on, Nicolas, don't be like that. We still have a few more minutes left. Why don't you tell us about your new movie? That's why you're here, right? No, Cage said simply, still standing beside his chair. I'm not going to sit here and let you continue to mock my life's work for the entertainment of your audience. I'm not going to be your dancing monkey. Dancing monkey? Colbert's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. Nicolas, I think you're being a little paranoid. This is just a normal interview. Maybe you should sit down and take a breath. A normal interview? Cage's voice was getting stronger now, more intense. Stephen, let me ask you something. When was the last time you had a guest on this show and spent the entire time telling them how terrible they were at their job? I never said you were terrible at your job, Colbert protested, but his voice lacked conviction. You didn't have to say it directly. You've been implying it for the past 20 minutes. Every question, every comment, every smirk on your face has been designed to make me look like a fool. Well, congratulations, you've succeeded. The audience was completely silent now. Some of them were looking at their phones, probably wondering if they should be recording this. Others were staring at the stage with wide eyes, unable to believe what they were witnessing. Colbert tried to regain control of the situation. Nicolas, I think you're overreacting. We're just having a conversation about your career. If you can't handle a little criticism, maybe you're in the wrong business. If I can't handle criticism? Cage's voice rose to a roar. Stephen, I've been handling criticism for 40 years. I've been called everything you can imagine. I've been mocked, ridiculed, and dismissed by critics who wouldn't know genuine artistry if it bit them in the face. But you know what? I've never had someone invite me onto their show under the pretense of promoting my work and then spend the entire time trying to humiliate me. I'm not trying to humiliate you, Colbert said, but even he seemed to realize how hollow the words sounded. Then what would you call it? Cage demanded. What would you call spending 20 minutes attacking my performances, my choices, my entire approach to acting? What would you call reducing 4 decades of work to a series of internet memes? Colbert's mask was starting to slip. The practiced television smile was wavering, and for the first time, he looked genuinely uncomfortable. Look, Nicholas, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. Why don't we start over? Start over? Cage laughed, but there was no humor in it. Stephen, you can't unring a bell. You can't unsay the things you've said. You can't take back the disrespect you've shown me and my work. Disrespect? Colbert's voice was getting defensive now. I never disrespected you. I was asking legitimate questions about your career choices. Legitimate questions? Cage's voice was incredulous. You asked me if I ever watched my own movies and cringed. You called my performances internet memes. You suggested that I've become a caricature of myself. You told me that audiences deserve better than watching me have mental breakdowns on screen. If that's not disrespect, then what is? The studio was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Even the production crew seemed frozen in place, unsure of how to handle what was unfolding before them. Colbert looked around desperately, as if searching for an escape route. Nicholas, I think you're taking this way too personally. This is just television. This is just entertainment. Just entertainment? Cage's voice was quiet again, but there was a dangerous edge to it. Stephen, this is my life. This is my passion. This is everything I've worked for since I was a teenager. You sitting there in your comfortable chair, making jokes about my commitment to my craft, that's not just entertainment to me. That's an attack on everything I believe in. But Nicholas, Colbert tried again, surely you can see the humor in some of your more intense performances. I mean, even you have to admit that some of them are pretty over the top. Over the top? Cage's voice was rising again. You know what's over the top, Stephen? Inviting someone onto your show and then spending the entire time trying to tear them down. That's over the top. What's over the top is using your platform to mock and ridicule a guest who came here in good faith. Colbert was starting to look panicked. This was clearly not going the way he had planned. Look, maybe we should take a commercial break and talk about this off camera. No, Cage said firmly. We're not taking a break. We're going to finish this right here, right now. You wanted to put me on trial for the crime of being passionate about my work? Fine, let's finish the trial. Nicholas, please. Colbert's voice was almost pleading now. Let's just move on. Let's talk about your new movie. My new movie? Cage's voice was filled with bitter laughter. Why would I want to talk about my new movie with someone who clearly has no respect for anything I've ever done? Why would I want to give you the opportunity to mock that too? The tension in the studio was unbearable. Camera operators were zooming in closer, sensing that they were witnessing something historic. Colbert was sweating now, his carefully constructed television persona crumbling before everyone's eyes. Nicholas, I'm sorry if you feel like I've been unfair to you. That wasn't my intention. Your intention? Cage's voice was incredulous. Stephen, your intention was crystal clear from the moment I sat down. You wanted to get a reaction out of me. You wanted to push me until I snapped so you could have your little viral moment. Well, congratulations. You got it. That's not true, Colbert protested weakly. Isn't it? Cage's voice was getting louder again. Then explain to me why every single question was designed to make me look foolish. Explain to me why you spent 20 minutes attacking my work instead of actually talking about my new project. Colbert had no answer. He sat there, speechless, as Cage continued his devastating critique. You know what the real tragedy is here, Stephen? You had the opportunity to have a real conversation with someone who's dedicated his entire life to the craft of acting. You could have asked me about my process, about my inspirations, about what drives me to take risks. Instead, you chose to turn it into a comedy routine at my expense. I was just trying to be entertaining, Colbert said desperately. Entertaining? Cage's voice was filled with disgust. You think humiliating your guests is entertaining? You think mocking someone's life's work is funny? Let me tell you something, Stephen. Real entertainment comes from genuine human connection. It comes from honesty and vulnerability and truth. What you've done here tonight is the opposite of entertaining. It's cruel. The studio was dead silent. Even the audience seemed to have stopped breathing. Colbert looked around desperately, but there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Nicholas, he tried one more time. I really think you're overreacting to this whole thing. Overreacting? Cage's voice was quiet now, but filled with a cold fury that was somehow more terrifying than his earlier outbursts. "Stephen, I've given you more respect than you deserve. I've sat here and tried to have a civilized conversation with you while you've attacked everything I hold dear. If that's overreacting, then I guess I'm guilty as charged." Cage started to walk toward the edge of the stage, but then he stopped and turned back to face Colbert one last time. "You know what, Stephen? I feel sorry for you. I really do. Because you're so focused on getting your cheap laughs that you've forgotten what it means to be human. You've forgotten what it means to treat people with dignity and respect. And that's not just a failure as a talk show host, it's a failure as a person." With that, Nicolas Cage walked off the set, leaving Stephen Colbert sitting alone at his desk, speechless and humiliated. The studio remained silent for what felt like an eternity before someone finally had the presence of mind to cut to a commercial break. What started as a routine promotional interview had turned into one of the most uncomfortable moments in television history, all because a talk show host forgot that the person sitting across from him was a human being with feelings, dreams, and 4 decades of dedication to his craft. So there you have it, the full story of how Nicolas Cage stood up to Stephen Colbert's relentless attacks and walked off the set with his dignity intact. Make sure to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one, and let me know in the comments. Do you think Cage was justified in his reaction, or should he have just taken the criticism and moved on?